every single one of our major customers and minor customers all shut their doors overnight.
You need the right people in the right place at the right time. And sometimes you have the right people in the right place, but at the wrong time.
I've got to keep going forward. I've got to keep looking for revenue streams. I've got to keep looking for growth, keep looking at new ways of doing things.
But, what's the culture like at the business? What do we stand for, the values?
I've got to tick that box on my personal development program I don't really want to be here.
Scaling up a business isn't easy. If it were, we wouldn't have less than 4% of businesses scaling beyond 10 employees or around £1 million turnover level, and less than 1% beyond 50 employees. But the contribution that we make as owner-managers to our economies is immense and should never be underestimated. Yet it can be a tough gig for all of us at times, and only other business owners truly understand the challenges that we face. And through ScaleUp Radio, we aim to help make things a little easier. We interview guests who have been where you are now and may have faced some of the challenges that you are facing. And they offer their thoughts and advice on what has worked for them, as well as what didn't. And we've also combined many of the lessons from these interviews and also through working with hundreds of owner managers over the last 10 years or so into a practical scale-up handbook that we've called the Entrepreneurial Scale-Up System, or ESUS. And it's for owner managers like you and me as we navigate our own scale-up journey. And you can order a copy through your favorite online book retailer or by going to all the W's, esusgroup.co.uk, www.esusgroup.co.uk. On this week's episode of ScaleUp Radio, we have another value-add presentation, and this time it's centered around something called critical numbers. When we say critical numbers, we're not just referring to the financial side of the business, because critical numbers are used throughout the framework of your company, from accountability through to your business rhythm. And you'll hear that it's really as much about the people side of the business as it is about the numbers. And with this presentation, we're going to explain just what critical numbers are, the importance of them to our scale-up journey, and the common mistake, the big common mistake that most people make, and what the effect of ignoring them or neglecting them could mean to your business. We'll also give you some hints as to how to help you to define your own critical numbers, giving you some advice on how to fit them then into your business rhythm. And as with all of the ScaleUp Radio core presentations, I refer to some tools and some techniques. And if you'd like a copy of them, there's a link in the show notes, or you can find them within our book, The Entrepreneurial Scale-Up System. And following the presentation, we also have a panel discussion of business owners talking about how they use critical numbers within their own businesses, some of the challenges that they faced with using them, and how they've dealt with those challenges. And you might think that critical numbers is a little bit of a dry subject, but they're incredibly important with your scale-up journey. And as I've said, it's more about the people and when used properly to inspire your team. This time, we're going to look at something that we call critical numbers and how to align our team and make them more effective. And the critical numbers come into a number of parts of the framework, including in the accountability and in the rhythm habits. And I know critical numbers sound like they could be dry, and we're going to certainly try and make sure that they're not too dry, and they're really important, and if they're used well. And they come into our Inflight checks in a couple of areas. So we look at things like, is the critical number is identified along with the 3 to 7 supporting SMART priorities, so that we know what that real focus is. But then it's about that visibility and that religiously tracking progress against the rocks, as we call them, key individual priorities, but also our individual critical numbers. Well, critical numbers, the technical definition is that it's the one metric, operational or financial, that represents a weakness or a vulnerability that will have the most impact on the business. But it can also be an opportunity. It can be something that we're striving to achieve. So what is the one thing that we really need to focus on, that if we either get it right, will make a huge positive impact on the business, or equally, if we don't address it, will make a huge negative impact on the business, whether that be the overall performance or the long-term security potentially of the business. So that's technically what a critical number is about. Why are they important to the team? Well, we've talked a couple of things already, but it's providing that focus on what is really important so everybody in the business can really see it. It provides a common goal, something that we can all work to, but it does also really support empowerment. And part of the way it does that is it gives a little bit of a learning opportunity for everybody in the business to understand what is important on an ongoing business. And eventually, and if we go back to that empowerment model that I put up and we talked about last time around, it's helping everybody to understand in their own minds what is the right thing to do, so they can, when they're making their own decisions, they can do so in light of what they know over time is important about the business. And we use critical numbers, I've mentioned, in a number of ways in our framework, which we call ESIS, by the way. That's the Entrepreneurial Scale-Up System. And we use them in two key ways, really. One is for the overall business. So what is the critical number, or maybe a couple of critical numbers for the overall business? But then for each individual, what we're trying to get to is that individually, we also know what our critical number is for the next 90 days, so that we can, above all else, if we were to achieve that particular number, we could say, well, at least with that, that's the really critical thing that we need to do. And then, as I mentioned, we build that in then to our business rhythm. So on a weekly, monthly, and obviously quarterly basis, tracking that progress, making sure whether we're on track or not, and therefore whether we need to adjust. A couple of questions that might help think about what could get us towards what is a critical number within our business. So are there considerations, are there things related to our business model that are absolutely critical to the ongoing success over this next medium to short-term period? And are there any specific challenges right now that we're facing that deserve real attention? So they, for example, are we seeing declining quality? Are we seeing increasing error rates creeping in? Have we got an overdependence that's building on a particular client or maybe a key individual, or have we got high employee turnover? Whatever it might be. But what is critical for the business for the next 90 days? And it might also be what keeps us awake at night. There are probably a few of us here that wake up at 3 o'clock in the morning worrying about something in particular. Well, that might give us a clue as to what might be that critical number. And of course, if we're identifying that and doing something about it, then that's going to help us to have that feeling of a little bit more of control. Common mistake in setting critical numbers is to set it at too high a level, so that we might do something and just say, well, sales are a critical level or a critical number. Well, that's all very well, but it's a bit of a lagging type number, and it's a bit high level. What we really want is something that we can influence and achieve. So, if we use an example outside of business, if we want to lose weight, then you could say our critical number is our weight. Well, okay, great, but if we want to impact that, actually maybe the critical number should be more around maybe our calorie intake, and setting a number on that, because we know if we reduce our calorie intake to a certain level, that is likely to have an impact on our weight. Or maybe it's about exercise and a certain amount of exercise and type of exercise we want to do, because they're the things that we can control. So ideally, we're picking a critical number that is something that we can control. So if we were going to say, well, sales are really important to us, well, maybe there's a particular aspect of sales that is critical. So is there a point in our sales process where things are not working as well as they should do? So for example, it could be maybe we're not converting from a particular point, and then we can look at that and work out, okay, well, what is it, and what might be a critical number that we need to do there? Or is it a particular number? Do we need to be making a particular number of phone calls every quarter to the right kind of people, or every week or day to the right kind of people? What's that critical number? And that's something we can influence, that we know if we do that will lead to achieving the sales that we want to do. So is it all about the numbers? Granger, I said I'd bring you in here.
Thank you, Kevin. No, especially if we're D-type people in our disc profile, we just drive by numbers and everything's numbers. But actually, A number is the outcome of the work that's done to achieve it. And that work is done by people, that could be you, and it's done by the processes. So actually the number is to help you understand where your process is failing, where your people are not motivated or focused in terms of achieving things. So it's not just the number that you need to think about. You really need to understand, is the process right? And are the people capable of delivering those numbers? So use your critical numbers to actually improve and develop your business processes and your people. It's not just about the outcome.
Brilliant. Yeah, and that whole thinking of going through it is really important. And one of the tools that we have within our armory, within the Smart 90 program that we have, is something we call the Inflight checks. And they allow us to, as a group, to have a look at some of the important areas of the business and then have a tease out between us what we think are really important and that we should be working on and that would have the most impact if we were to do those over the next 90 days. So critical numbers, key performance indicators or KPIs, what's the difference? Because we've probably all had KPIs banded around. So how are critical numbers different from key performance indicators? And I think the thing here is that we've all got a set of what we might call key performance indicators within the business that should be the handful of numbers that we are looking at on an ongoing basis. The difference here is that a critical number is not normally additional to that. It's normally a subset of one of those, in that something's really come to the fore for this quarter. So that, yes, those set of 5 to 7 key performance indicators might be key, but what's critical this quarter is one particular aspect of that. And it's kind of through the 90-day planning process as well. We're getting from all the things that we could do through to things that we should do to the things then that we must do. And the critical numbers are around things that we must do. Luke, was there anything you wanted to say on that link between critical numbers and KPIs?
No, I was just thinking that my critical number is definitely calorie count.
Yeah. All right.
Coming into Christmas. But yeah, no, Kevin, I think it all makes a hell of a lot of sense. And I like the way Granger explained it there, in that your numbers are the things that you're looking at that are going to help the people and the process do the things, so that you can measure and see what success looks like. Yeah, instead of KPIs, then they're not negatives, they're positives if you play them right.
Yeah, absolutely. So here's a couple of things that might help to just see the difference. On the left here, we've got a couple of potential KPIs. It might be that in our particular business, productivity, we're saying, is a key area, and we might have a number around productivity. It could be, if we're a software developer, it could be our utilization rate, or it could be our time working on projects. And on the right, then the critical number for that could have come to the fore for this 90 days is, we're seeing too many bugs that are coming through the business. So we're spending time fixing things instead of working on client projects and moving things forward. So for this next 90 days, maybe the time spent fixing bugs becomes a critical number and reducing that number, or maybe it's the overall number of bugs themselves. If we're and we had this specific example come up the other day on one of our smart boards with a manufacturing business. Maybe it's the uptime of the machines. So the machines need to be operational basically 100% of the time, and that's a key performance indicator that we've got generally going through the year. But for this quarter, we've realised that actually that's dropped, and the reason it's dropped is because the machines haven't been maintained according to their maintenance cycle. So there's a critical number for this next 90 days, which is to service all of those machines. And Louise, I wonder whether you wanted to say something there about, because you mentioned before about it's not always about the ideal, the okay and the not okay number.
Yeah, because when you look at the critical numbers, the way we put them out there, you've got an ideal number, an okay number, and a poor. So you set this at the beginning of the quarter, or you set it out at the beginning of the month, what it is you're going to measure. What is your measure of success? And sometimes people think that, for instance, you'd have to have, so if it's all machines serviced this quarter, then you might say, well, ideal is 100%. okay is 80% of the machines, and maybe poor is 75% or less of the machines. But you could have an example where it's an all or nothing situation. And there's absolutely nothing wrong with having, a very black and white situation in that case. We had one, for instance, recently. We were delivering a particular program, and we needed to make sure that all the program was delivered by a specific date. So it was a case of, 20 people completed that program was ideal. 20 people completed that program was okay. And anything less than that was not acceptable. So that in that case, your critical number doesn't have to be a range. It's a very clear, it's a success or it's a failure if you've missed it by the one. So I think that was something that we just wanted to make clear.
Thank you, Louise. And then picking up a little bit on what Granger was saying before, then actually, this made me smile. Granger dug this out actually and sent it to me. Made me smile. We always think about, again, the numbers, key performance indicators. Well, here's a new way of looking at it as, keep people interested, keep people informed, keep people involved, and keep people inspired. So, it's very much not just about the number itself. It's about how that number itself can help to achieve the interest, the informed, the involved, and inspired. So in other words, all of those great things about clarity, alignment, communication, and empowerment. So that essentially is everything that we wanted to talk about from a critical numbers point of view. The challenge that we'll leave you with on that, the thinking, is how are you going to go about identifying your critical number? And I have put in brackets numbers because maybe it's okay to have a couple for the next quarter. And so have a think about that. So I wonder if we've got any questions. We've got a couple of minutes for a Q&A. How are we using critical numbers in our business? Who could we?
I know Steve uses critical numbers a heck of a lot, so maybe he should share with us.
Yeah, Steve Bradstock.
Okay, so critical numbers within the accounting side, we've got a set of fairly fixed overheads. So we've got a fairly standard margin as well. So our critical numbers form part of our break-even point. From other aspects of the business, the engineering side, we've got critical numbers to hit. So we've got sort of 4-hour response times, 1-hour response times, 8-hour response times. And that obviously our ticketing system gives us those critical numbers that we need to be hitting. The other aspects of the business with our sales and marketing, we've got critical numbers that our sales team needs to hit, and the forerunner to that is the number of leads that we generate. So we've got a critical number of leads to generate based upon our conversion rates. So there's 3 or 4 examples of how we use them in our business.
Brilliant. Good. Thank you, Steve. Any thoughts on those, Louise? Yes, you look like you're about to say something.
Well, I was just going to introduce Helen because Helen's put her hand up.
Yeah, my question, hi there, Kevin. My question is, so if one of my KPIs was I need to get 10 Google reviews or in a quarter, right. So could the critical number be, because does it have to be defined? So obviously I would ask every one of my paying customers for a review, but that's not actually a number. So how can that work?
Yes, I think that's a good point. Sometimes it doesn't necessarily need to have exactly a number, to the nearest decimal point or something ascribed to it. It will be linked very much to your priorities. So every 90 days, you're going to work out, and certainly working with us in that way, you're going to work out what those priorities are for the next 90 days. And then ideally, there's one of those maybe that bubbles to the surface that's like the overarching critical thing that we need to do. And there may or may not be an absolute number with a decimal point attached to that. But it is about, as Granger was saying, the really important things is getting that clarity, that agreement of this is what we really must achieve in this next 90 days. And then defining that as in as smart a way as possible. So that comes back to that specific, measurable, accountable is RA, is what we do, and realistic and time bound, so that when we're setting certainly priorities, that's what it needs to be. So therefore there should be something specific that we can measure about it to know that it's a critical number if we're going to do that.
Right.
Just to bring something else in on that, Helen, you said there weren't any numbers involved in that, but actually there were two, which was you wanted 10 Google reviews. So that maybe is one of your critical numbers. So that 10 is ideal, maybe 9 is okay. But you also said, I'm going to do that, and this is the process bit, by asking all of my customers. So again, that's asking 100% of my customers.
Yeah.
So there is something, and just having that, it just focuses you on, actually, I do need to do this. I do need to ask 100% of my customers, because I've now got that as something that is specifically identified as critical to us getting to the point that we want. So there's often, it's interesting when you start to look into, there are often numbers that you can just pull out that will just, and the purpose of them is really to focus you on achieving whatever it is you need to achieve. It's providing that focus. We had a classic one around, so recruitment is another one, where you're looking at, you need to augment the skills in the team. You could set a critical number around the number of people that you recruit. So for instance, if you're looking for 2 people, 2 is ideal, 1 is not. Is okay and none is poor. So you can find ways of just targeting yourself on those and providing that little bit of extra focus.
Okay, thank you. Cheers.
Great.
The other thing I was just going to bring to mind, Kevin, recently I read a very interesting article, and it was talking about the word priorities. Okay, and up until the 1980s, it was only ever the word priority. It was about choosing one. And in business speak in the 1980s, it changed into priorities. Yeah. So if you think about it in terms of your KPIs, your handful of numbers that drive your business, those are your priorities. Yeah. But the critical number is now in this quarter, what is your priority? What is the most important thing to drive your business forwards?
Yeah, no, that's really, really interesting. Thank you, Granger. And just going back to what Steve Bradstott was saying, he talked us through a number of numbers, which were really his key performance indicators. He got some indicators for finance, some indicators for marketing, whatever else. The question then is, what is the one for this next 90 days that we need to focus on that will make the most difference? Mike from Grubs Up, you've got your hand up.
Yeah, just going back to Helen's and adding on from what Louise said. I mean, those 2 critical numbers that Louise highlighted, they're asking 100% and to produce 10 reviews. I suppose the things that strike me there is the other numbers, as far as the measurability is concerned, is, are you getting 10 reviews if you ask 100 people? And actually, there'll be a reason why you want those 10 reviews. Are you accomplishing that? Is 10 reviews enough? So there's a lot of analysis to be done afterwards on those basic numbers, which is where we get the measurable, is that a sensible target? Am I attacking it the right way? Is it giving me the result that I actually wanted as well?
Very good.
You get what you measure, is a saying.
Yes, no, very good. Thank you, Mike. And I think you've highlighted the thinking of that goes behind this. It's very easy to just, this is my critical number for the next 90 days and not give it too much thought. The more thought you go into it with your teams and do the kind of thinking Mike was just talking about there is, why is this important to us, and what are we going to do about it? How are we going to make it better? All of those good things are what we need to do. And it's just another one of those great habits to get into, and the more you do it, the more that you'll get attuned to it, and you will hone your skills at setting, but then also working on those critical numbers throughout each 90 days. Critical numbers, you were just saying, Faith, that it's easy to fall in the trap to just specify something a bit vague or a bit top level like turnover as being a critical number, and not really drilling down into what might drive whatever it is that you need to really address for that next 90 days. Is that right?
Yeah, I think so. It's about, I think we need to probably be better at looking at what that 90 days what's going on in the business in that forthcoming 90 days, and therefore what critical numbers are going to impact that, as opposed to just going top line or bottom line, which is the default position for most of us.
Brilliant. Matt, what you're nodding away there. What would you like to add here?
Yeah, just about the same. I've always just focused on like the turnover, probably more so than the bottom line, which is the wrong way around, really. But one other metric I always do kind of keep a very close eye on is like our PPC spend, because we're so heavily, reliant on that. And, I've got to keep almost a daily look on that and seeing that, the return of investment is good, that all campaigns are delivering on that. And then, those are one of the things that we can react to quite quickly, by turning off or adjusting campaigns or something like that. But because we are so heavily skewed by our PPC, that's the one metric that we do, look at. But, same as like Stu said and Faith said, is that's all I'm kind of looking at. I'm sure there's a lot of other things that we should be looking at as part of those critical numbers.
Yeah. All right. Gary, do you want anything you bring in here?
I think as Faith said, I think turnover is probably the go-to figure for a lot of SMEs. But I suppose if it's an established business, I think turnover is still a good figure to run with, because you're not going to, everything should be fairly consistent, really. So it is still a good figure to go from. So we've just started doing a board pack actually with lots of figures. I think our challenge was, we've come up with about 25 or 30 figures. So it's kind of difficult to drill those down into, as you say, one or two really that are key metrics for the 90-day planning. Yeah. I suppose it's the aim, isn't it? Is it growth? Is it more clients, profitability? Whatever it is, really would be the key metric to what you're trying to drive forward for.
Yeah. So we've all got within our businesses a set of numbers. So whether we have a dashboard or whether we call them our key performance indicators, we've got those, and turnover is almost certainly going to be one of those, isn't it? Probably. So the thing for me with critical numbers, there's a couple of things here. The first of all is what actually now for the next 90 days rises to the top. Out of all the things that we're measuring and we might think drive the performance of the business, what this quarter is most important. So it could be, as Stu said, it could be something that needs fixing. So it could be a weakness that we need to address, or it could be something that we do need to move forwards from a growth aspect. So that's the first. So it's what is, if we really could only achieve one thing this next 90 days, what is the most important thing that we really have to achieve in this next 90 days? Yeah, there might be other things we want to achieve, but if we don't achieve this one, we'd go, you know what, we missed a trick here, didn't do very well. That's the first question. And then the second is actually what is it ideally it should be something that we can more of a leading indicator than a lagging indicator. So let me just back up and explain that a minute. So turnover, it's great to focus on turnover. It's obviously a key number for us, or say profit or whatever else. But actually, what are the things that drive the turnover? So it could be, for example, that if it's the amount of new business that we need, and if it's the amount of new business, it could therefore be the amount of prospect calls that we have within that period, and maybe that becomes the thing we're going to really focus on. So yes, we want to increase the turnover, but the thing that we can influence and that we can go, you know what, that will really lead to what we want to do. That might become the critical number for this next 90 days. Does that make sense?
Oh, cool. So I have been using that bit right then, because actually my critical number for this quarter was X number of sales calls.
Yeah.
Or quality. Okay, that's cool.
Yeah, absolutely. So because for you, that's the most urgent and most important thing for you to sort right now. So yes, I would say, which is why I hesitated when I didn't want to jump in straight away, but when you said you thought you got it wrong, because I don't think you have got it wrong. It's just that it's not just always about what's the big thing we're aiming for. Sometimes it's what problem do we need to fix and what's the metric for that. So it could be, it could be in a software company. So Paul, it could be sometimes, you want to get pieces of code out and written, But it could be that you see error rates are creeping in and you've got lots of bug fixes that you end up going back to. So it could be for 90 days, it could be, let's fix it and make sure that the focus is on not having any bugs that we've got to fix or reducing that number, for example.
So should your critical number be changing every 90 days?
It could.
But it doesn't have to.
No, it doesn't have to. But I think if you don't change, if you just get in the habit of going, well, it's always this, then you're probably not going to be giving it the thought that it should do. Yeah. So if you think about the 90-day planning process, we're working through all of our to get to our handful of priorities, aren't we? The handful of things that are really critical that we want to achieve in this next 90 days. Logically, a critical number would come from one or more of those, wouldn't it? Because if they're really important, logically, then a critical number will tie in with one or more of those. Louise, did you want to add anything in here?
Yes, I was just thinking, I think when we talked about technically, this is what it is. So technically a critical number is the one that if we don't achieve it, it will have a very negative impact. But actually, Stu, you would turn that round and say, what will have the most positive impact? Yeah. And actually, so technically it is the critical number that will have a negative effect if we don't do it. But actually from the positive and appreciative side of it, what is the one thing that will deliver us the greatest impact, if you like? The two can absolutely be the same thing. Yeah. And Kevin's right. Every quarter you should be reviewing your critical number, and it's easy to pick a critical number like sales, for instance. It's an easy one to hit, or profitability. There may be other critical numbers. I know I've been working with a couple of people at the moment where recruitment is key, and I know we've talked about recruitment in our groups before. So, we've just set a critical number with somebody where they need to take on, for instance, 2 new technical people. So the critical number is 2 is ideal, 1 is okay, none is poor. Because if they don't do that in the next quarter, it'll have, they won't be able to push the business forward. The plans dictate that they need those people. So just reviewing and thinking maybe slightly differently from your standard sort of measurable numbers to some things that are slightly different that you might want to pick as the key thing you need to deliver.
Yeah. Peter, anything you'd like to bring in here?
For me, probably revenue was always a very important one, but actually I'm starting to focus a bit more on profitability, rather than revenue. So that's definitely becoming more of a critical number. And I think the other thing for us very much is, we can see that there's different numbers mean different things. So there's certain numbers like website visits, things like that. They're great numbers to track, but they don't generally turn into anything. Whereas we know that if we do 4 pictures a month, we'll generally add 1 new client on. So it's for us to track that and try and drive that than anything else, I think. So similar to kind of Gary, we've got a monthly board report from the accountant. We're starting to put together an operational board report as well around numbers. So that's kind of going to help us do it. But I think the key thing is for us is having a date when we're going to review it. Because it's kind of putting it in is fine, but someone's got to take responsibility for kind of updating it, tracking it, and then everybody talk about it and decide what we're going to do about it. And that's kind of been the more important thing to do, which we do in our kind of monthly kind of away days now.
Yeah, exactly. There's no point in just paying lip service to it and just putting a number down, whatever it is, and then just having a look at it in 90 days time and going, yeah, we did or we didn't. It's part and parcel of that whole thing around priorities and going, well, what can we do about it then? So that I think that's great. If you know that those number of prospect calls or those meetings is critical for the sales, and if that's the current focus, then great, so that could become a really good critical number. And then we're looking at it and we're going, well, we haven't hit the one that we should have hit this week. So what are we going to do next week to make it to the 2 to make up for one that we didn't do last week or whatever? So great. Claire, anything you'd like to add in here?
I think when we do Smart 90, the critical number is always the area I struggle with. Always, right. Always the thing I'm struggling to get my head around. I have always focused very much on a financial number, but now I'm starting to think more about other numbers that are critical. So, like my theme of the last 90 days has very much been about marketing and engagement. So I've tried to use some of those figures in my critical numbers. But it's taken a while to get. So I've been doing what I've done. I don't know, about 11 Smart 90s, and I have to say that I haven't got to grips with critical numbers yet. Yeah, it's a tricky one to get our heads around and to use them properly. I think that's right, which is part of the reason why we're having a little bit of focus on it. Sam, what about you? You know, you're relatively new into the whole process. What are your thoughts here?
Well, I'm a bit trying to get my head around it, but going back to what you just said, as instead of using recruitment and profitability, I'm thinking like maintenance in our line of work. Maintenance is what, you know, can stop us being productive. Right. So when you said what drives turnover, well, when our tools are down and our machines are down, obviously that is a major problem. Yeah. And it's having time to do your maintenance on your machines when you're busy all the time. So it's not a number as such, but yes, it's a critical downfall when it's not happening. So I'm just thinking, you know, maybe of these 90 days, we need to do an overhaul in all our machinery, because we have had major breakdowns. Brilliant. I mean, we've got four bandsaws, for example, and 3 went down in one go. So that was a major problem to us. But maintenance is probably, I'm thinking just immediately, you're saying that is our critical numbers at the moment.
That's a really good example. Louise, did you want to pick up on that?
Yeah, I did, and it is a really good example. And I'm glad you picked up on that, because that picks up on my manufacturing background too. But, you know, maybe the way to measure that, and don't forget, a critical number doesn't need to be you've got the 3 options. In your case, if you wanted the whole thing, you know, all 4 bandsaws, for instance, to be overhauled or done in the quarter, then ideal is 4, okay is 4, and poor is 3. So in other words, you're setting the understanding that actually the only thing that is right here is all of them. It's all or nothing. So you can set your critical numbers to be very black and white, where it's everything or nothing. And if we do 1 less than 4, it's a failure. Because that drives the urgency and the understanding that actually this is a non-negotiable. You know, it really has to happen. There isn't any slippage in it, and you can address your critical numbers like that as well.
And I think the other thing that does, Sam, is that illustrates what could be the difference between a key performance indicator and a critical number. Okay, so probably I'm guessing here, but a key performance indicator for you might have a number of things that we go, these indicate whether we're on track generally and things we need to measure. And one of those might be downtime of your machinery, for example. Okay. Right. Yeah. So key performance indicator is that, you know, it's either uptime of, you know, 90+% or something, or it's downtime of less than 10%, right? Whichever way you look at it. But, you know, that might be a key performance indicator. But a critical number for this next 90 days for that might be the focus on maintenance, because you know that's what will drive for this month. So does that illustrate? So critical number could also still be the downtime. You could have that, but because you're just having a focus on it. But actually, it's even better to go the step further that you've just done, which you said, well, we know the way to influence that is to make sure the machines are maintained and they've all had their maintenance done, and therefore that's a critical number for this next 90 days. Yeah. Does that, Paul, does that make sense? Does that help?
Yeah, no, it helps a lot. I think my approach to it has been, I traditionally, like Claire, struggle with this area. And then I think going back to, you know, the point about it being absolutely critical and almost like the one thing makes me think also make it a lot more behavior based. Yeah. They're like, you know, for us, it's sales, it's always sales. So actually, like in a traditional sense, you know, the number of, I don't know, LinkedIn connections would be if we know that so many LinkedIn connections results in so many conversations and so many demos, it's kind of that could easily be and then it's a behavior thing. You can't necessarily control the outcome. You can obviously massage it and do, improve your process, but the same is true of like traditional dials, isn't it? Yeah. If you know that you need to make $10 a day, you'll only have 2 conversations. You extrapolate that over 90 days and you've got a KPI. Because I think I've been guilty of when you said at the start about it being per role, I think I've only ever really completed the critical number for the strategy for the 90 days and not thought about it on a roles and responsibilities level. So suddenly pulling out a behavior KPI for each team member, that's if we make sure that this drives their behavior, that to me is far more effective than what I do, which is revenue. So yeah, it's good going into the next 90 days thinking about it differently.
Yeah, brilliant. And yes, that is so ownership, as Peter was saying as well. So it's not just a case of that number and it's kind of just disappearing into the back of our minds. It's there front and center, and somebody is in charge of bringing it, whether it's to the weekly meetings or to the monthlies or whatever it is, but keeping track of it and therefore doing something about it, or at least raising it for us to see what we need to do about it. And also, as you say there, that ideally we've got 1 or 2 critical numbers for the overall business, but then individually, when we think about what are my rocks as Kevin, what are my rocks for this next 90 days? And I've got those. I want to try and pick out 1 or 2 critical numbers for me in my role over the next 90 days. Now, there probably will be a link back to the business ones, but there might be something specific in my role for this next 90 days that is down to me that I need to do.
Yeah, and Stu's just mentioned about making them smart, which is absolutely key. But don't forget, in BizSmart language, smart is specific, measurable, accountable, realistic, and time-bound. So remember that A is accountable in our language.
Yeah. Actually, I think for me, that's been the biggest difference this 90 days is I've had a process to achieve or to make the critical numbers doable. As opposed to just pluck a number out there and go, I want X number of sales, is actually looking at that and making it much more intentional about how am I going to achieve them, then creating all my smart rocks in line so that if all goes well, I will achieve my critical numbers. And that's, I think, been a big difference for me, because until maybe very, very much like Claire, until recently, it's just been not really understanding kind of what they are.
Brilliant.
Sounds like we picked a good topic for this month, then, Kevin.
Yeah,
clears up a lot of fog.
Yeah, I think so. Don't forget to take a look at www.bizsmarts.co.uk to access a great range of resources to help you in your scale-up journey. So that's bizsmarts.co.uk, which is bizsmarts.co.uk.
This has been a Monkey Pants Productions podcast.